Many economists and investors, including Ray Dalio, founder of the world's biggest hedge fund firm, Bridgewater Associates, have predicted a period of stagflation in the United States in recent months. Sounds like a strange and frightening term. However, as the name implies, it simply means two things are happening at the same time: economic decline and inflation, also known as recession inflation. It means that inflation is greater in a weak economy. This is strange because normally inflation occurs as a result of a booming economy. There are low interest rates, unemployment is low, supply is plentiful, and business is thriving. As a result, producers can raise their rates because there is so much demand. Workers begin to demand more money for the same work, and inflation begins to rise. That's how it usually goes. However, stagflation is an extraordinary economic scenario in which inflation is high in a struggling economy with rising unemployment. This is a particularly difficult situation for those in charge of economic policy because decisions to control inflation, such as raising interest rates, will only exacerbate the problem. The economic situation has deteriorated, resulting in higher unemployment and more difficult financial conditions for businesses and individuals. So what causes it? Stagflation appears to be counterintuitive. When economic conditions deteriorate, inflation usually falls. On the other hand, inflation rises when economic circumstances improve. According to economists, stagflation can only be experienced in two scenarios: when there is an unexpected supply shock or when a country's monetary policy is poorly managed. First, there are supply issues. When an event suddenly reduces the supply of essential goods such as food, oil, or crops, prices rise across the board. Prices for both commodities and all other products that depend on them at some point along the supply chain. So prices rise because of scarcity, but scarcity of such basic economic commodities such as oil also reduces production capabilities, which has an impact on economic yield. As a result, there is stagflation, rising prices, and a worsening financial climate. This was a major contributor to the 1970 stagflation. In 1973, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries imposed an oil embargo on Japan, Canada, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, South Africa, Rhodesia, and, you got it right, the United States. By the end of the embargo in March 1974, the global price of oil had risen nearly 300%, from $3 per barrel to nearly $12 per barrel. From May 1973 to June 1974, the average retail price of a gallon of regular gasoline in the United States increased by 43%. So there you have it, inflation. However, because oil is such a significant industrial resource, it also had an impact on the American economy. Politicians advocated for national gasoline rationing. President Nixon asked gasoline retailers to stop selling gasoline on Saturday nights and Sundays voluntarily, resulting in massively long lines of motorists eager to fill up their tanks while they still could. As a result, the supply shock resulted not only in price inflation, but also in financial distress. That is the definition of stagflation. But in addition to supply shocks, there is a second source of stagflation: mismanagement of the economy during a period of massive money printing. When an economy is tanking, central banks will frequently print a large amount of money in order to boost economic growth. The problem is that adding more dollars to the system causes inflation. And if inflation continues for an extended period of time, people become accustomed to it and come to expect it. In the 1970s, the Vietnam War devoured vast sums of money. In addition, in order to be re-elected, President Nixon significantly expanded Social Security. However, once the US dollar's link to gold was broken in 1971, the US was free to print as much money as they wanted to help pay for all this. Between December 1971 and December 1972, the M1 money supply increased from 228 billion to 249 billion, and M2, which quantifies retail savings and small deposits, increased from 710 billion to 802 billion by the end of 1972. As a result, the money supply expanded. But what about the incompetence? To try to control inflation, Nixon executed both wage and price controls around the same time. This did initially work, but it came at a cost because the controls caused food shortages. Meat vanished from grocery stores, and farmers became so frustrated that they drowned their chickens rather than sell them at a loss. That is bad for the economy. Worse, once the price controls were lifted, there was a catch-up period in which businesses raised prices dramatically to make up for lost time, causing inflation to rise once more. In addition to supply shocks, excessive money printing and poor economic strategic planning can cause stagnation. So, just like the 1970s, we have high inflation and economic vulnerability. The Federal Reserve's solutions to each of these are now the most difficult. The issues are contradictory. So while the Fed would prefer to print money and lower interest rates in times of economic weakness, in times of inflation, the Fed must subtract money and raise interest rates. So how do they deal with both at once? They can't, of course. And what Ray is predicting is that the Fed will raise interest rates and most likely try to navigate their way through the middle of these two problems, which will almost certainly lead to stagflation, a period in which not enough is done to combat inflation and not enough is done to significantly improve the economy. Ray Dalio also discusses the political struggle that is intertwined with the situation, which adds another layer of complication. Raising interest rates and subtracting money in large amounts at a time when citizens are already having difficulty making ends meet is understandably unpopular. And Ray has previously stated that he doubts there is enough political momentum in this day and age to definitively raise rates in order to stop inflation. And if that's the case, then it just adds to the likelihood of stagflation. Paul Volcker, the Federal Reserve Chairman from 1979 to 1987, raised the Fed funds rate to 20% in the early 1980s, and he prompted a severe recession. That hurt a lot of people. It did significantly reduce inflation and ended the stagflation period of the 1970s, but people helped to reduce inflation. Companies are feeling the pinch and cutting back on spending. The question is, will there be the political will to do something similar today? Ray believes it is unlikely. Well, it took the Fed half a year to even acknowledge the existence of inflation. As a result, it is an intriguing factor to consider. And if the political will isn't there, it just adds fuel to the stagflation fire. We are caught in the middle for a long time because not enough is done to fix either of the two problems. In this scenario, if the Fed truly wants to curb inflation, the strategy for doing so may be so painful that they will simply be unable to subject people to it. If that's the case, Ray believes we will be in for a period of stagflation, persistent inflation, and economic difficulties. As a result, there is nothing the Fed can do to solve both problems at the same time. That's all we have for today. If you'd enjoyed the video, why don't you give us a like and subscribe to our finance channel? Don't forget to hit the bell button below to get notifications on when we'd post next. Thank you for staying till the end of the video and hope you enjoyed. See you next time.